It began with screams that wouldn't stop. Not from the mother. From those who saw what she brought into the world. In a cramped, candlelit room of a small 15th-century village, a midwife pulled back the bloodied cloth and froze. The child's skin was mottled black and gray. Its eyes, too far apart, too deep, blinked once, twice, as if it were seeing something beyond the living. A second midwife crossed herself, muttering prayers. Someone whispered, "Hellspawn." Within hours, words spread through the streets. Men left their stalls, women clutched their rosaries. The church bells rang, not for celebration, but alarm. The priest arrived before sunset. He refused to touch the infant. Instead, he traced the sign of the cross in the air and declared it a message from the devil himself. The mother begged for mercy. The father said nothing. He had already fled. That night, villagers surrounded the home, holding torches high, chanting psalms between curses. Someone spat on the ground. Someone else swore the baby's mouth had formed words no mortal tongue should speak. And then, the crying stopped. Tell me, was it because the child finally slept, or because something else had claimed it? By morning, the whispers had grown into sermons. The priest's words from the night before were already mutating, passed from mouth to mouth like a fever. What had begun as a strange child became a demon's spawn, and by the time the story reached the market square, the infant was said to have been born with horns, a serpent's tail, and the voice of a grown man. People wanted proof. They wanted to see it. But the door to the mother's home was barred from within, and only the midwives had dared remain inside. The rest of the village gathered in the square, demanding answers. The parish council met in secret that morning, candles hissing in the damp cellar beneath the church. Father Aldrich, a man whose voice could stir both fear and fervor, stood at the head of the table. The devil sends signs before the harvest, he declared. If this thing is allowed to live, it will bring pestilence. It will bring fire. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. But in 15th-century Europe, no one dared challenge the church without risking their own soul, and sometimes their neck. The matter was sealed with a prayer and an order. The child must be removed from the village. Back at the house, the mother, Isolde, sat with the child in her arms, rocking it as if she could keep the world from noticing its existence. She had seen its deformities, yes, but she had also seen the way it looked at her, not with malice, but with a strange, searching calm. She remembered her own mother's words. Every child is born with a fragment of heaven. But outside, heaven's messengers were sharpening their spears. By midday, the first attempt to take the child came. 2 men from the parish, armed with long poles to avoid touching it, banged on the door until it cracked. Isolde screamed, clutching the infant to her chest. The midwives stood between her and the intruders, swearing by the Virgin that no harm would be done today. The men left, but not in defeat. That evening, Father Aldrich preached to a packed church. He spoke of ancient texts, real or imagined, that told of women who lay with demons and bore their children. He described plagues that followed such births. He warned that a single soul's weakness could doom an entire village. And then, his voice dropping to a near whisper, he said, "Evil does not always come with claws and fire. Sometimes it comes swaddled in cloth, with a mother's milk still on its lips." The crowd erupted. Some demanded the child be drowned before the next sunrise. Others called for an exorcism. A few, too few, said nothing, afraid their silence might be taken for sympathy. That night, as the village slept uneasily, Isolde sat awake. She could hear them outside, shifting in the shadows, testing her door, whispering prayers that sounded more like curses. The baby's eyes never closed, and in the pale moonlight, she thought, though she would never dare speak it, that the shape of those eyes was changing. By the third day, the church did not simply whisper about the child, it summoned the Inquisition. A black horse rider appeared on the horizon just after dawn, his cloak heavy with the red seal of the bishop's court. Behind him trailed 2 guards in chainmail, each carrying a hooked pike. The rider dismounted in the square without a word. He unfurled a parchment and read aloud. By order of His Excellency, Bishop Armand de Vienne, a tribunal shall be convened to determine the nature of the infant born to Isolde of Stonemouth. Should it be found to be the issue of witchcraft or infernal pact, it shall be purged from God's earth. No one dared breathe too loudly. Even those who doubted the tales kept their eyes low, An accusation of sympathy could damn you as swiftly as guilt itself. The tribunal was set in the nave of the church, candles dripping onto the stone floor like silent hourglasses. Isolde was brought in under guard, the child swaddled tight. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at Father Aldrich, who stood smirking in the shadows. The inquisitor, Sir Matthew Corbin, was a man of clean words and dirty methods. He began with questions that sounded like sermons. Were there strange dreams before the birth? Did you see an unfamiliar man in your home in the night? When your husband lay with you, did he wear the face of another? Isolde denied them all, her voice steady, though her knuckles whitened as she held the child. Witnesses were called. The first midwife claimed the baby had been born with a thin veil of black membrane over its face. The second swore she'd seen its eyes glow when it first cried. A farmer said his cow stopped giving milk the morning after the birth. A girl claimed she heard the baby speak her name in her sleep. Corbin listened without interruption. Then he turned to Isolde. Unwrap the child. The room shifted. The guard stepped closer. The cloth came loose. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The infant's skin bore mottled patches, like ink bleeding beneath parchment. Its gaze moved slowly, almost deliberately, from face to face, until it stopped, on the inquisitor himself. For a long moment, the church was silent. And then Corbin smiled. This is no ordinary deformity, he said. It is a mark. The verdict was not delivered in words, but in orders. The child was to be taken to the monastery at St. Maurice for purification. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. Isolde fought like an animal when they tried to take him. The guards pried her fingers loose one by one until her nails tore. She screamed his name, though in the chaos, no one caught it. The baby did not cry. On the road to St. Maurice, the party was ambushed. Not by brigands, but by villagers from the next parish over. They had heard the rumors and believed the child was a curse that must be destroyed before it crossed their land. Stones were thrown, one striking the infant's wrappings. A guard drew his sword. The air filled with shouts and steel. In the confusion, Isolde broke free of her escort and vanished into the woods with the baby pressed to her chest. The guards searched until nightfall, but found nothing. Only scraps of cloth snagged on thorns, and a strange trail in the dirt, as if something with many fingers had crawled alongside her. By morning, the official word was that she had drowned in the marshlands. But Father Aldrich knew better. He claimed to have seen her shadow in the hills at dusk, moving faster than a woman should, carrying something that was no longer just a child. The marshes were searched for 3 days, but no body was found. No footprints lasted more than a night, as if the land itself erased her trail. That only fed the whispers. Isolde had made a pact. She could vanish because she no longer walked as a woman, but as something else. Father Aldrich's sermons grew sharper, his voice cutting through the square like a blade. The devil keeps his own, he told the villagers. And he keeps them until their task is done. The bishop's court sent more men, armed, mounted, and hungry for absolution through blood. They combed the hills, raiding cottages, tearing apart haylofts, questioning shepherds until their flocks scattered. Then came the first killing. A woodcutter's wife was found in her hut, her face frozen mid-scream, her hands blackened at the fingertips as if burned from within. Beside her lay the corpse of an infant, twisted, gray, its features blurred and swollen beyond recognition. Some said it was her own child. Others whispered it had been the child, left as a warning. The inquisitor returned to lead the hunt himself. He questioned anyone who had ever spoken to Isolde, anyone who had sold her bread, anyone who had stood too near her in church. Confessions were beaten out of people, each one wilder than the last. She fed the baby with milk mixed with ashes. She sang to it in a tongue I've never heard. She left flowers on the old stones in the forest, stones with no names. In the 3rd week, a shepherd swore he saw them. Isolde, thinner now, her clothes in tatters, moving along the ridge at twilight. The child in her arms was not still. It writhed and twisted, its limbs oddly long, its head jerking toward the sound of bells from the valley. The shepherd claimed it turned its gaze on him, and in that instant, his flock stampeded without cause. Corbin's men tracked the sighting to a cave system in the cliffs. They found signs of habitation, burned herbs, bits of bone, a crude cradle made from twisted branches, but no trace of mother or child. On the walls were markings in black soot, circles within circles, intersected by crude crosses. The priest spat on them, calling them wards against holy touch. Then, On the morning of the next market day, the church bell rang not for service but for alarm. In the center of the square, tied to the well post, was a bundle of rags. Inside, a loaf of bread, a handful of herbs, and a strip of cloth from Isolde's shawl. Pinned to it was a message, scratched in charcoal: "The child is mine. The world is not." The bishop's court saw it as open defiance. The hunts doubled in number. Villages that had never even seen Isolde began setting up their own watch patrols, burning effigies at night to ward off her shadow. Farmers refused to work the fields after sunset. Mothers kept their children indoors, telling them if they wandered into the hills, the devil's child would call their name. But something else began to happen, quieter, more dangerous. Stories spread, not just of fear, but of power. A milkmaid swore she prayed to the child, and her sick cow recovered overnight. A fisherman claimed his nets were full after he dreamt of eyes like polished stone. The church moved quickly to silence such talk, but the inquisitor knew. This was worse than terror. This was fascination. In one storm-lashed raid on a barn suspected of sheltering Isolde, a soldier claimed he cornered her. She did not run. She held the child close, and in the flicker of lightning, its face seemed to shift, half human, half something pulled from the deep. The soldier swore its mouth opened too wide, and a sound came out that made his teeth ache. He never returned to the hunt. By winter, the land was split. To some, the child was the devil's herald, an omen that demanded fire and steel. To others, it was something older than the church, older than the cross itself, a being meant to unseat the order of the world. And in the frozen hills, the hunt went on. Each night, torches bobbed like restless stars, moving deeper into the dark, chasing a woman and the thing she carried. But if you listened closely to the wind between the ridges, you might swear the dark was chasing them back. It happened in the hollow between winter and spring, when the snow still clung to the hills but the rivers had begun to stir. The Inquisitor's men tracked smoke to a ruined chapel deep in the forest, its roof long collapsed, its altar black with mildew. They moved in silence, surrounding the place before striking. 4 men took the front, 3 more circled to the rear. Corbin himself pushed open the rotted doors, sword drawn, his breath clouding in the cold. Inside, Isolde knelt before the broken altar. The child was in her arms, awake, its eyes fixed on the cracked stone cross above them. She did not turn as the men entered. "It ends tonight," Corbin said. Isolde's voice was soft. "You do not know what you're ending." The guards advanced. That was when the smell hit them, not smoke from a fire, but the stench of burned flesh. Ash drifted in the air, settling on their armor. And then they saw it. At the base of the altar, arranged in a perfect circle, were the remains of animals, birds, hares, even a fox, each blackened as if by lightning. The first guard reached for the child. He barely touched its swaddling before he screamed, his hand blistering instantly. The others hesitated. Corbin did not. He lunged. The child's eyes locked on him. For a heartbeat, he stopped mid-stride, his mouth working soundlessly. Then his sword arm fell limp at his side. Isolde rose slowly, the baby cradled as if it were an ordinary infant. "You think this is the devil's work," she said. "But the devil is only a shadow of something older. He fears it, as you should." A sudden gust slammed the chapel doors shut. Torches guttered. In the darkness, something moved, not Isolde, not the child, but a shape that seemed to coil and stretch along the walls, without form yet unmistakably alive. When the light returned, Isolde was gone. So was the child. Only Corbin remained standing, his face pale, his lips trembling with words he would not speak. They searched the chapel, the woods, the hills beyond, but found nothing except a trail of ash leading into the river, where it vanished. Back in the village, Corbin said little. But those who saw him afterward swore he never entered a church again, and that at night he slept with no candle, muttering as if to someone in the dark. The hunt did not stop. But for the first time, the hunters began to wonder if they were the ones being followed. The ruined chapel became a place no one entered. Even the boldest thieves avoided it. They said the stones still smelled faintly of scorched hair, and that if you stood there at midnight, you'd hear a child's breathing, slow, steady, and much too close. In the weeks that followed, the hunts thinned. Men who had once marched eagerly into the hills began to make excuses. One claimed he dreamed of being buried alive, only to wake with dirt beneath his fingernails. Another said he'd seen the child at the edge of the forest, beckoning him forward, though when he followed, There was nothing but an empty clearing and the sound of running water. Corbin withdrew entirely. He shuttered himself inside a small house at the edge of the village, taking no visitors. Those who caught a glimpse of him through the window said he kept a crucifix turned face down on the table, as though to hide it from someone or something. Yet Isolde's absence did not bring peace. Instead, the story grew teeth. Travelers carried it to distant towns, each retelling darker than the last. In one version, the child had wings and flew over the hills at night. In another, it could slip into your home unseen, leaving only the smell of ash and the sound of dripping water. Priests spoke of it from pulpits as a warning, heretics whispered of it as a sign. And then, the offerings began. On the old stones in the forest, people left bread, coins, sprigs of herbs. Some came from mothers with sick children, some from farmers praying for rain. All claimed they had no other hope, and that sometimes their prayers were answered. The church tried to stamp it out. Patrols destroyed the offerings, chased off anyone caught kneeling in the woods. But the more they forbade it, the more it spread. Villages miles apart swore they'd seen the same thing. A woman in tattered robes, carrying a child whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Even the Inquisition could not agree on what to do. Some argued for a holy crusade to wipe the hills clean. Others said the hills should be sealed off entirely, left for God to judge. And beneath all of it, a quieter truth gnawed at those who had seen the child and lived. It was changing. Each sighting described it differently, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, sometimes with features that seemed almost human again, only to twist in an instant. By the first thaw of spring, the fear was no longer about whether Isolde and her child would return. It was about what they might have become in the time since they vanished. Years passed. The hills swallowed the old trails, and the ruined chapel sank further into the earth. The bishop's court stopped sending men. The sermons faded, but the story never died. Children still whispered it to each other in the dark, how a woman had defied the church, carrying something not meant for this world. How the torches and swords had failed. How she had simply kept walking. Some said she left the country entirely. Others swore she lived on, hidden in places no priest dared tread, raising her child until it was strong enough to walk beside her. But in every version, one thing was certain: the child's eyes were never the same twice. You can tell yourself it's just a legend, that the midwives lied, that the inquisitor broke, that the offerings in the forest were the work of desperate peasants and nothing more. You can tell yourself there is nothing in the hills but stone and wind. But if you go far enough into that country, there are still villages where the people lock their doors at night, not against thieves, but against a woman they've never met, and a child who is no longer a child. And they will tell you this: if you ever see eyes watching you from the treeline, do not run. Do not speak. Do not even blink. Because if you do, they will change. And when they change, it will not be to something you understand. The church called it a sign from hell. Perhaps it was. But perhaps hell was only the first place it passed through. Because some doors, once opened, are not content to stay on one side.